Hi, and welcome to the Deer IQ podcast, where smart hunting begins. I'm Adam Lewis, and we're continuing our series called Public Land Beating the Odds, where we dig back into strategies, mindsets, and approaches to be successful on public land despite the many challenges that come with it. Last week, we had Jared Scheffler of Whitetail Adrenaline, and we had a great talk about things new public land hunters need to know, but it would be a great listen for any public land whitetail hunter. Part 2 is coming, but this week I'm with my friend Mark talking about a couple big myths or traps that many public land hunters fall into and how vital it is to avoid them and just how to do that. Okay, so here are the top things to look for during this episode. What is my history with public land hunting, and what do I claim will make the biggest impact for anyone to become a better hunter? What is the big myth I think many hunters believe, and what is the root cause of this? Why does believing this actually lead to more hunting pressure and poor hunting many times? How did Mark and I fall into this exact thing last year, and what is the fix for falling into this trap? And there's a lot more good stuff in there, guys, so let's get to the podcast and up your deer IQ. All right, we're back here with Mark. Mark, welcome back. Good to have you again.
Thank you very much.
So we're in a public land series and having some good discussions with some different guests. So we want to take a little break and just talk about some real life things and the big question for this week here related to public land. So I'm going to turn it over to Mark, and we're going to go from there.
Yeah, so I mean, there's been some great stuff. You've certainly talked a lot about public land. What would you say, I've never asked you this, like between public and private, how much do you hunt? If you had to like generalize on an annual basis.
That's okay. So in Michigan, I pretty much hunt Michigan and Ohio, and then I throw in another state. That's all really I can handle, you know, if you look at the season and stuff. So I'd say out of state, right now in Ohio, it's all private, which is a little odd. In Michigan, it's like 90% public.
Okay, that's what I would have guessed.
And I hunt very little in Ohio, like 3 weekends, let's say a year.
Yeah.
So I'd say most of my, at least 80% or more of my hunting is public land. And it has been mostly since about 2010. So that's kind of what I'm drawing from is that knowledge. And when I hunt other states, it's going to be all public. So, yeah, so public land hunting.
Public land. You've, I mean, I've known you long enough to actually kind of see you have like shifted some of your thinking about that. And certainly it relates, like we're going to kind of drill into like the number one thing. And you've talked about this a little before, probably on some other episodes as well. Just talk me through that kind of that like transition. Because certainly, I mean, if you look at like the past 10 years of hunting, a lot's changed with technology, with the amount of like other content, free content, you know, YouTube, podcasts, like a lot of people are talking about this and there's so much more information. And that's even probably shaped a lot of it. So like,
yeah,
how has your strategy changed, and how would you boil that down into like what's beneficial for people to know?
So when I first started hunting, mostly public was around 2010 or so, like I said. And before that, I mean, there was a lot of years that I hunted, so I wasn't like a new hunter, but it was mostly private. And so the biggest difference I noticed, and although there's a ton of people getting into public land hunting now, I would suggest at least trying it some, because that was the number one thing that made me a better hunter. Because when I hunted private for so many years, you don't have to make a lot of decisions. You're just like, this is the 1 or 2 spots I can hunt, so I'm just going to go hunt. And it doesn't really stretch your muscles to grow that much. But when you're hunting public and there's big chunks and you got to make all these decisions, all of a sudden you have to know why, or you should know why you're hunting here or there, and it really forces you to become better, right? And so, but when I first started doing it, I really didn't have the public land knowledge or mindset. And so I would either, and these are some typical things that people do, and we'll get to the number one myth here in a second, but some of the typical mistakes, big mistakes, are you hunting something that looks good, but it's wide open, right? Like see a lot of these stands and these wide open spots. And there might even be sign there, but that's not made in daylight most of the time, right? So you're hunting these deer that'll never show up there in daylight. Huge mistake. So I did some of that, right? Then I figure, I got to go, find some more thick cover to get deer moving in daylight. And so then I got into this, I think, phase, and this is, I think, a big mistake that people get into that leads into this myth, is I just started going deep. I started like really pushing into spots that I probably had no business doing. And in the process, like I'd get so far intruded into these areas that it was first super hard to get in there because I wasn't prepped, right? I didn't have that great of equipment. I had enough, like a climber or something, but I was forcing my way into spots and probably ruining hunts in the process. Like before I even got in there and got set up, I was making noise. I didn't really know my exact routes and stuff. And so I was doing stupid stuff like that. But then it's getting out, right? And so I call those really high pressure hunts. A lot of them you screw up before you even start hunting, right? I call those like kamikaze hunts because at the best, if you're so far deep and you don't have a way to get out, it's like this one hunt mission, right? And you literally probably have not much data to go on. You're just like, I'm going back to this spot. And you usually fail when you do that stuff, right? Because you don't have the data and it's really highly intrusive, but you might get lucky and get in somewhere and you got one hunt, because then getting out is always harder than getting in, right? It just is. So those are some big mistakes I made. But yeah, kind of the thing now, getting into this myth. So public land is super popular now. Part of it is because it's a kind of a fad thing and people just want to do it because they've seen it, they've heard about it, right? And some of it's just by necessity because people can't find private anymore, they can't afford it, right? There's a lot of reasons that a lot of people are doing it. But one of the big myths is this idea of going deep is going to be the Disneyland where all my dreams come true, right? I call it the Disneyland mentality, and that's why, because like,
loaded with deer,
we hear about
else,
it, yeah,
like big bucks running everywhere.
Yeah, like it. So I just go deep and expect that, and this is what I see. So 30, 40 years ago, the people talking about that, it probably was more like that back then, because when we talked about this, we didn't have apps. You had to go buy a map that was just low. It didn't tell you much. It just showed you general blobs of, this is public land. Okay. It might have had contour lines, but that's about it, right? Very little detail. And now we have these apps that show us everything, right? You can see, the hairs on a deer's back almost. And so all this stuff is super visible now. So where these spots were a lot more secret to people that put in the work to find them 30, 40 years ago, now every Joe Schmo, regular hunter, can see it super easy, right? And so these are not secret spots anymore. Plus, everybody talks about them, right? And so if you listen to podcasts, if you watch YouTube, all this stuff, you go to seminars, everybody's listening to and reading the same playbook. Go here, do these things, you'll find the big bucks. Go here, do these things. And so now there's a large group of people where before there weren't as many people that were hardcore bow hunters. Like I think of my dad when he started, like it was in the 70s, people were compounds were just first coming in, right? And hardly anybody bow hunted. Tree stands were just coming in. And just like there was very few people that bow hunted versus gun hunted. And so you didn't have a lot of competition. But now it's like the opposite. Like people are really into the gear. They're much more mobile in their setups. They have the tools to be able to get to the same spots. They can see them, right? And so everybody's reading the same playbooks. They have the ability to get back there. They can find the spots. And so when you go back to these Disneyland locations, going deep, maybe it's an island in a swamp or, whatever it is, everybody else is there. Like I literally do scouting off season and I'll look at this spot, it's really deep. And I did this a couple years ago in particular. And I look at this spot. I'm like, I haven't been in there a few years. It's really like a mile and a half back in, which is about as far as you can get. And that's another thing. Talking about area of country is different too. But around here, in a lot of spots, you can't go miles and miles and miles, right? You're going to hit another road. Mm-hmm. And so there's limitations there as far as going deep. So I go as deep as I can. There's some barriers. It wasn't easy to get there. But I saw like 4 or 5 stands from that season of guys that hauled them back there and were also hunting deep, right? But then, maybe 300 or 400 yards off the road, I found this really good sign from the past fall. And this was a spring scouting thing. So this was this past year's sign, big rubs. I found big scrape areas, this overlooked spot right off the trail. But it was not your typical spot you'd see on a map. People were walking right past it, and I found a really good sign there. And then last year, I put some trail cameras in there. I think I hunted it once, but I was getting pictures of really good bucks in this super overlooked area. So this myth nowadays of going deep is probably the biggest one I see that guys get caught up in. And it doesn't mean you can't find a big buck back there, but it has to be obviously also overlooked by other guys. And there's just more guys doing that now. And so you just got to think about it. It doesn't mean you shouldn't scout those areas, but you can't expect that just going a mile or even 2 miles is going to get you away from guys.
I remember when I...
Okay, so here is your high IQ moment. Just yesterday, I drove by some public land locations and saw some very full parking lots, and it got me thinking. When you hunt public land, how do you deal with the competition factor? When you see several trucks parked in the lot where you want to hunt, are you compelled to also hunt there because you want to get the big buck before them? Or do you conclude that they're blowing out the spot maybe, and you're better off going elsewhere? Human psychology many times drives us to compete when there's a perceived limited resource, which can actually lead to crowding into certain areas when we may be better off finding new territory that isn't as pressured. Whenever you feel compelled to emotionally react over a spot, that may be a sign to step back and make an objective decision, which most of the time gives us a better result. That's just something to think about for us public land hunters. And if you want a detailed guide with 8 new approaches to beat the odds and the crowds on public land, check out our free public land hunting guide. It's compiled from many of our experts on the show and some things I've had success with over the years as well. It's a big help, and you can find that linked below. Also check out the Deer IQ services, including private land plans, taking the Deer IQ test, the new one, and consultation, and our newly announced weekend whitetail workshop, now taking registrations. Details for all those are below. All right, and now let's get back to the podcast.
I'm like a 90-10 private to public, but I can relate for sure that, I don't want to always take for granted that I might have that private. And so even though I still, hope, it's part of the reason I started hunting public was to challenge myself and expand kind of how I approached it. Because I'd say I definitely realized I was kind of getting lazy. And one of the, I'd say probably first things that you told me is kind of, you were giving me the, overview, get up to speed, not the whole playbook, but you're dude, you got to learn pretty quick. But it was hey, you don't have to go deep. And it's more important to really actually kind of coming back to this principle that we're talking about is have a foundation in place and do the work to try and just find areas. Don't assume that just deep is the answer, because you're just going to have to go deep, go deeper in terms of intel right. and boots on the ground and just think about, even looking at a map, the easy button answer is probably going to be what looks to be that perfect thing. It's that's, you're probably gonna have other guys there. Well, we have a great example from last year too of
and everybody else can see that. That's the problem.
Everybody can see that.
If you can see it easily, other people can too. Doesn't mean don't look at it, but you maybe avoid that. Go for the places that aren't just popping out to you, right? But yeah, so last year we made this mistake, right? And I knew better, but I still led us astray, right? So we have this camp we do for a weekend, and jump in at any point in the story, but we're like, oh, I typically hunt alone, but I was like, you were just getting the mobile thing going and set up, and I'm like, hey, let's just go together somewhere. I know some spots. And our buddy Nate, we'll blame Nate.
Sure.
He's like, hey, what about this spot, guys? And I'm like, oh yeah, I've been back there. I've scouted that before. It's potentially a good land feature. There's swamps on both sides. There's this ridge down the middle, and it is potentially a good funnel, right? And there's always trails. I knew the spot, right? And so, but it also sticks out very well on the map, right? And so we get all set, we park in this parking lot, and there was one car there, right?
I think just
there was one car there. And I mean, but these people could be anywhere, right?
Yeah, you're talking miles of public land. Yeah.
And so we go back to this spot, and it was over a mile in there, right?
Yeah, I think just about a mile.
Yeah. So we, book it a ways through an open woods, and then we start sneaking, as we start getting closer and closer, and we're necking down, and I drop you off at a spot. I'm like, this is a pretty good neck, and I was going back in a decent amount further, right? And I literally get 30 more yards, and I'm like, what am I hearing? And it was people talking. Like there was two guys, it was those guys, they were right back in that neck, and they were setting up a tree stand. They were talking real loud, making a bunch of racket. And I was like, are you kidding me? But it's because it looks so good. It's very visible to everybody. Yep. And so we pulled out of there and went around the other side of the swamp. I think we totaled over like 3 miles walking.
Yeah, it was at least another like half mile.
And, we didn't see anything, right? You didn't see anything. I didn't see
anything. I mean, it still looked like a decent spot to maybe catch some, but yeah, like one car in the parking lot, and they were in the exact spot that we were planning on being.
So,
but it was like the go-to spot on a map kind of thing. If you looked at it, it's like
typical blunder of many public land hunters, and I made it, and I knew better, but it just kind of shows that, right? And to contrast that to the year before, so you and our friend Ryan, who's just getting back into hunting, right? He's pretty novice. You guys went like just behind our camp, right? And got into a bunch of deer, right? The deer were all right there, right? And it was like, 200 yards from camp?
As the crow flies, maybe like 300, but like you could see the tree line, you had to work out, but it was a very close spot. Yeah. And I saw more deer than anybody else, and almost got a shot at my unicorn buck.
Yeah, and then Ryan hit a crack at a nice 8-point, right?
Yep.
So that's just one of the big things is realizing that, and there's other things that go into it, but not just assuming that going deep is gonna solve your problems, I guess.
Yeah, I like that. I think it's all great points. As far as like the season, kind of the timeline of how the season progresses, obviously like deer behavior is naturally going to change. You're going to have more or less hunting pressure depending on, gun season and stuff like that. So how does your approach differ if you're looking at, early season, mid season? Like how do you break that down, and then how do you adapt?
So public land hunting in particular, the beauty about it in most states, and in Michigan, we have the early season for youth and stuff, so that adds a little pressure. Mm-hmm. But the beauty is you can get a lot of intel and really stack it up before you hunt. And then you have a really high odds chance that first day. So because deer are, not on their guard yet, at least they shouldn't be. And you have all this data you could collect for months beforehand, right? Glassing, you got some trail cameras out maybe, and you can make these strategic hunts. And so my goal, and it is different from year to year, but my goal is to have enough intel and data that I have at least 2 or 3, hopefully, bucks that I'd like to shoot and kind of have them figured out. And so I have like an option A, B, and C, and I think I can shoot them if I hunt here, here, and here for these 3 different bucks, and these are probably in different areas, right? And then I just see what conditions add up, the best for those. And then so for that first week or so, and again, it depends on other hunters, but the first week or so, I have probably 2 or 3 good chances at a deer that'd be like a strategic strike. And it's because we have all that lead time to figure that out, right? And deer are probably still mostly on summer patterns at that point. And so that's a really good option, right? So you really have multiple of these the first week or so. But then they're feeling the pressure, right? From you, from everybody else in the woods. And so pretty quickly, it's got to move to this phase, I call it, of where you're hunting other hunters, right? And so you're starting to just observe other hunters. And this gets back to something I threw out a while back about a goal of hunting much less this season, right, for most guys. Because just getting back to this chart, looking at the shape of this, like highly effective hunters, guys that do it year after year, that do really well, they're the guys that you're like, man, they're always shooting a big one, People get jealous, but they're doing something different, right? And they're making very strategic hunts and hunting very seldom, right? They hunt once or twice and shoot their deer. That's it, right? That's the most high odds approach. But the flip of that is hunting the most and doing all these other important things less. And this is an ineffective hunter. This is what I used to do. This is what a lot of people do. And it just hurts your chances, right? You're just shooting yourself in the foot by doing that. And so once you make those future strategic strikes on public land the first few days or first week at max, then you got to flip and start just observing other hunters again. And so you got to stay out of the woods. You got to now recalibrate and figure out, when can I make the next surgical strike? And it might not be till, let's say, our season starts October 1st. Maybe it isn't until late October till you can figure out another deer or have things stacked in your favor again, because of all the shifting that's going on from the food sources to the pressure and all this stuff. You might want to stay out until that, later in that month. You got to recalibrate, and a lot of it's based on what other hunters are doing and seeing and predicting what deer are going to do based on that, and refining the deer. And it's really, they're going to avoid the hunters. And so you got to look at where the hunters are and then figure out, okay, where are the hunters not at this point?
Yeah. So staying open-minded, I know that's something that I'm trying to do. Of historical data has its place, but I think you just have to be willing to be real about what's changing and recognize and being willing to even change your approach depending on what you're seeing.
Yeah, definitely. You can't pre-decide what's going to happen. And that's a mental rut that everybody gets in. But we project, right? We think it's going to happen here, and this is how it's going to work out, or this is the particular deer. I saw this deer. This is going to be the deer. If you keep a little more open-minded about the caliber of deer maybe I want to shoot, it may or may not be that one that I saw or whatever, and just your approach, because things are changing so much that if you get locked into how you think it should happen, you're going to get stuck. You're going to get stuck in that. And I'm hunting this spot, but it's an emotional reason versus an actual data reason. And I've done that a lot, but that really doesn't usually turn out well, right? So it's recalibrating, getting back on the deer, and then going back through this to where you have the data, you have a really good chance, you feel, to take a deer in a certain spot, and then you go in and hunt. So,
is there anything else critical that, as far as like going deep, phases that you think is really important to share?
As far as phases, I mean, you're looking at times of season too, and a lot of that goes back into your off-season scouting, your pre-scouting and having enough areas that by time of year should be good or historically are good. And then that's a good place to start, right? So you can dive into those spots. If I have a spot that's typically good in the rut, this bedding area, I have a couple areas I can hunt or trees set up in there to hunt. That's where that becomes very helpful. And that's all pre-done. You're not chasing the deer. You're like staying ahead of them in those, with all that pre-scouting you've done. And then all you have to do is get a little bit of intel at that moment to tell you, okay, I should hunt here type thing. So.
Awesome.
All right.
And I know you've done other stuff before, so I'd say anybody, watching or listening, like last season, you had a series of public land, some really great guests who were able to share a lot of information actually that you can pull even more kind of specifics from. So that'd be a great thing to go back and check out.
I think of Manny, the ones with him were really good. He had a really great story and a lot of just information in there, so that was good. So, and we also have a public land guide, so 8. So we covered like 2 of these things that are in the guide. There's 6 more, so guys can download that. That's free, the free public land guide. And again, we also have the Deer IQ test, the new enhanced version. Mark took it. It is a paid thing. Like there's a lot of value in there because it helps you really see your actual weakness and where you can improve to really make big steps. So that's also available to guys to check out. So, okay, so here are your high IQ takeaways and challenges. Consider if you tend toward kamikaze type hunts that are one and done hunts, or the Disneyland mentality of just going deep. And what can you do to right the ship and be more effective with your opportunities in evaluating the hunting landscape where you're at? And you can download the free public land guide to help with that as well below. Next week, I dive back in with Jared Scheffler to get more into advanced public land tactics that we just kind of scratched the surface on and how to beat the odds in public land hunting. You won't want to miss that great episode, and I'll see you then.